Hello everyone, welcome to YK Reviews. As we're continuing the Saw train here, we're moving on to Saw 4. So let's get into it here. So with the Saw franchise here, I feel like this is where it really sort of goes up and down when it comes to these movies. Now with the death of John Kramer, as we discussed in Saw 3, post a playlist of all the Saw movies I have reviewed so far up here, so you can definitely go check those out. But with this one, since John Kramer is now dead, and obviously this is all spoiler review, so if you haven't seen the movie, be prepared to be spoiled. Check out the movie, come back to the review as well. So with Saw being dead, I feel like they were frantic about it, or that they regret killing him off so soon. But we get the introduction to all these new characters here. So before we hit play on Saw 4, if you are new to the channel, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button, like button, hit the notification bell so that you never miss out on a video. I do retrospective reviews, spoiler reviews, in-depth reviews, and also weekly entertainment news video and tier ranking videos too. So definitely consider hitting that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any of these types of videos. But with Saw 4, we open up with the autopsy of John Kramer. So you just see John Kramer laying there, butt-ass naked. They're opening up John Kramer, they're opening up his head, his body. They see this little wax that was inside, I believe it was his spleen. So they open it up, they come to find out that it was actually a tape. Now it gets a little flashback from the previous movie where he actually put wax on this little tape recorder and swallowed it. And then we get introduced to Hoffman, who actually hears the tape recorder saying that the games aren't over, that people are still going to be tested. And that's when we cut to like the opening kill now and this opening sequence of these two victims. So these two victims, you've got one person that his eyes sewed shut, and then the other one who's had his mouth sewed shut. So you've got a blind person and a mute person, with both being chained up to this little machine in the middle, and they have the keys in the back of each other's necks. So the one being blind is freaking out, not knowing what's going on. The one that's with his mouth sewed shut can't say what's going on, can't tell him like the situation or anything like that. So obviously human nature kicks in, they end up beating each other up, and obviously the person that's muted has got the upper advantage and ends up winning the game, surviving the game, because the person that's blind had no chance with everything going on, and so he ends up dying. The person that had his mouth sewed shut ends up surviving and ends up like opening his mouth and like breaking the stitches and everything. It's just a gruesome way, but he actually plays a key role, which we won't get into now. We'll talk about that later on. So we get into the crime scene of where Detective Kerry was from the previous movie, how she was ended up dying with that little ribcage trap. So Detective Hoffman is there, and we get introduced to two new characters, which is Strom and Detective Perez, who I believe they're from the FBI. I can't remember off the top of my head what department they were. They're two people that start playing a key role in the movie because they feel like there is another apprentice involved, not just Amanda and Jigsaw. They feel like somebody else who's doing the heavy lifting is involved, and Hoffman is trying to dismiss that, but they feel like there is somebody else out there. And so we get to where Detective Rigg is. Now he was also in the previous movie, so he's the one that was in the SWAT team in the second movie that ended up going into the wrong house. He is also with Kerry as well, so he's got Eric Matthews missing, he's got Kerry dead, like all these people in his police force is going missing or ended up dying. And so we sort of see like a little backstory when it comes to him, how this job is taking over. His wife ends up leaving him, and he ends up getting tested. Now I'll be completely honest, when it comes to like his whole games and all of his tests and stuff like that, I feel like they weren't as strong or as interesting, especially when it comes to the people that are being involved, when it comes to him having to try and save them or not. I just feel like it really slowed the movie down and wasn't really a great focus, especially because you're getting this whole sequence of there's this room where you've got Hoffman tied to a chair, you've got Eric Matthews who's actually alive. He's actually in this jumpsuit with beard and long hair. He's just looking a shredded, disheveled man of himself. So he's actually ends up on this block of ice. So we could have had this really great focus on the two of them and that kind of aspect, but instead it just focused on Rigg and his traps and his tests and all that kind of stuff. So when it comes to Rigg, he finds this woman in a contraption with like her hair being pulled, and it's basically pulling her hair, pulling her skin, pulling her skull. He ends up saving her, but she ends up stabbing him because she's also being tested. She got this voice recording. He ends up subduing her and ends up going into his next test, which is a motel owner who's actually super creepy, big guy, just taking advantage of women and stuff like that, recalling it. He ends up forcing him to tie himself into the bed and ends up having all of his limbs being pulled off. Another test is he goes to this school where these two teachers are like back to back. One of the teachers ends up saving herself and the other teacher dies. So again, like, these little tests aren't really interesting for me. They just sort of were there. Like, you've got these people being tested there and like Rig is just there. We actually see that the whole school, we get flashbacks of Rig and these teachers themselves, because they weren't helping this kid who I think was getting taken advantage of at home or something like that. I honestly don't remember off the top of my head, but we see these little flashbacks of these teachers that were involved, so they kind of got justice, I guess. And so while all of this is going on, you're getting what's going on with like these two new agents. So the male agent, Strom, ends up interrogating Jill, who is actually John Kramer's ex-wife. So they have this interrogation scene. We come to find out what happened between her and John and how John started all of this craze. So we get flashbacks of her actually opening up this rehabilitation clinic for these addicts. One addict ends up late at night wanting to go get his jacket. He ends up running out of the clinic. He's pushing this door. Jill, who was pregnant at the time, the door ends up slamming her stomach. She ends up getting her baby killed, which has pushed John Kramer to the edge, and this is what caused him to start this whole jigsaw serial killer, which I do like that kind of aspect. I do like that we got a little bit more, but like I said, this was the issue that they faced by killing off John Kramer. It's that you still have John Kramer in the movie, but it's all with flashback sequences and that kind of stuff, so you get more of his backstory. But with him being dead, this is the only way you can have John Kramer, tobinbell in the movie. So rather than the Saw movie being focused on like great traps and all this kind of stuff, you have Rig being tested with uninteresting plot points, and then you have flashbacks with like Jill and John Kramer and that kind of stuff. So it's just kind of like meandering throughout the whole movie while you get to like the good parts, because the two agents, Perez and Strom, end up going to that school where Rig was. Billy the puppet, who's always a great addition to the movie, he actually ends up arriving at the scene and ends up having his face blown up with all these shrapnels end up going on Perez's face, thinking that she's actually being killed off. Oh, and also a quick note, when it comes to like the flashback sequences there, we actually see the person who ends up killing John Kramer's baby being the first victim of the first trap. He's stuck in the chair. He has to push his face with like these knives in front of him. He has to push his face into the knives in order to release a contraption. He ends up doing that, and by his rage and anger, he tries to go at John. John moves out the way and he ends up in this little like trap with all these barbed wires and everything like that. So I think he gets killed off that way. But that was a really nice way of seeing the Saw trap for the first time. And so then we move on towards the third act. So with the third act, we actually get introduced to the person that was the mute in the first sequence, in the first kill. He's actually a lawyer for John Kramer. He was a lawyer for like one of the teachers as well. So he's just like a really scumbaggy lawyer. So he was actually being tested as well. So you think that he's being involved with the location of where Hoffman and Eric Matthews is, and then so we get this whole like sequence again, similar to like the second movie, everything just interconnecting here. So the third act, you've got Rig going into like this location. Strom has actually found out some clues and is going to a location, so everything is just interconnecting. So when it comes to Strom, the FBI agent, he's actually in the same timeline as the events of Saw 3, because you hear like everything going on with Jeff, John Kramer, Amanda, all of that kind of stuff in that room. So when that door ends up closing, Strom was actually behind the door. He heard everything there. So just a bit of confusing in terms of like the events of the timeline. So Strom ends up opening the door. He thinks that Jeff is going to be killing him, so he ends up shooting Jeff and ends up getting trapped in the room himself. So when it comes to that, again, just really underwhelming. So like the whole ending of the third movie towards this movie, like those two sets of events just kind of felt very anticlimactic and very underwhelming, with especially with Jeff and Dr. Lin and like the characters that they are. And then we switch to Rig and the whole trap area where Hoffman and Matthews is. So Rig ends up pushing the door and he gets shot by Detective Matthews because that lawyer guy gave him the gun. So he ends up shooting Rig. Rig ends up shooting the lawyer guy, who again is telling him that he's being tested. All of these events take place, and then with Eric Matthews, who is still standing on the ice, he ends up getting his head squished by two ice blocks, ends up killing Detective Matthews, and this honestly was one of the most heartbreaking deaths in the whole franchise for me. All he wanted to do was find his son in the second movie, and just every movie he's just getting shat, spat on, and just getting through all these twists and turns, I just felt so bad for him with all of this events taking place. So he ends up dying, the lawyer ends up dying, Rig ends up dying, and then we come to this big twist reveal that Hoffman, who just magically stood up from the chair that he was being tied from, is behind all of this as well. So he is another Jigsaw apprentice. And so like I mentioned, the door that was being closed by Strom from like the Saw 3 timeline was actually closed by Hoffman. So again, we've got like another apprentice. And when it comes to this movie, I felt like this movie was okay. It was great seeing Detective Matthews. It was great seeing these like twists and turns when it comes to that third act of itself. But I just felt like everything just felt very underwhelming when it comes to, again, Matthews, Rig, Jeff, the Strom character, and again having like somebody else being behind all of this, another apprentice, just felt very anticlimactic and underwhelming. I remember watching this for the first time and I just remember feeling a sense of disappointment because you killed off Johnkramer in the previous movie only to have like another apprentice be involved with this. So you've got like Johnkramer dying, Amanda dying, and now another apprentice is being involved. So it just kind of felt very meh to me. And like I said, with Rig's Saw games and being tested and all that kind of stuff just didn't feel as strong as it could have been with the whole movie. So really a step down in terms of like the previous 3 movie. A fun, entertaining movie nonetheless, but I honestly wouldn't go back and rewatch this over and over again if I had the choice. So I felt like it is so far the weakest of the franchise. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you've seen the movie, did you enjoy Rig's storyline? Did you enjoy the third act? What your thoughts are about Hoffman being revealed as another apprentice for Johnkramer? Let me know all of that in the comment section down below. But that about wraps it up for Saw 4. Keep an eye out on the channel as we'll be discussing Saw 5 in the next coming days. So subscribe so you're not missing out on that. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. This is YK Reviews. Peace.